Hello, I have with me today Dr. Sue Shortland and Paul Williamson, a learning and development professional. So we're here today to talk about engagement and particularly during the pandemic. So let's start with you, Sue, if I may. You wrote us a very interesting piece on engagement. And of course, this has been a sort of flavour of the month topic long ahead of the pandemic as people sort of segued into engagement rather than employee support. And also it encompasses benefits as well. So can you just give us your thoughts on where we're at with engagement at the moment?
Right. I mean, I think it's an interesting area, and it's almost like a holy grail for the sort of for companies, because engagement is really about encouraging or finding that employees are willing to go the extra mile. They're willing to put in, huge amounts of discretionary effort, and the idea is that generates organisational performance. And certainly in the current environment, engagement is obviously critical because companies are in tough economic times. So if we've got engaged employees, that's obviously clearly good news for firms. So it goes beyond, the basics of people being motivated to achieve a goal or being committed to their organisation or just loyal to their organisation and hanging on in there. It's actually about this discretionary effort that people are willing to put in. I think the key point, though, is engagement kind of comprises three main areas. There's sort of like intellectual engagement, where people are thinking about the job they do, and they're going beyond that because they're trying to think of ways that they can do that job much better, and therefore they're very absorbed in their work and what they contribute to their firms. But there's also what's called affective engagement, and that's your kind of emotional state and your emotional connectedness to the job. And I think in the current pandemic, there's an issue there that people are starting to feel a little emotionally divorced, really, because you're working alone from home. You don't necessarily have the same linkages with the people at work that you would have had before, and the types of things that you would have done before. Excuse me. And then there's also this notion of social engagement as well. And that's really about how you actually interlink with your colleagues at work. And of course, we see lots of sort of online meetings and video calls and so on. But a lot of the day-to-day chat by the coffee machine, it's gone. We don't seem to do that anymore. And I know that there are some organisations. I mean, my own one does this. We have the I think it's called the Zoom drinks cabinet once a week. So and it's supposed to be that the fact that we all used to congregate in the kitchen. And I wouldn't say we were having alcohol because we weren't. We were working, but we would congregate and have a cup of coffee or something. And now it's become the sort of the Zoom drinks meeting once a week. But you have to make yourself kind of go to it because you're, emotionally and socially, you're not actually there. So you have to physically think, oh, yeah, I'm going to switch on. I'm going to do this. And I think what's happening is people's ability really to have that effective and social engagement is potentially starting to drift away. And I think that's, a worrying point because they're major contributors to people actually feeling engaged in the workplace. So I don't know if that's something that, Paul, you might think about, commenting on from your perspective.
Well, certainly, I think the way in which people connect has obviously been really impacted by everything that we've seen most recently, and the kind of intensity that some of the Zoom or whatever platform you're using, the concentration that's required, and a lot of the conversations are very much task-based, and you're on camera, and you're in your own home. I think that's created quite a lot of pressure on individuals. So this idea of trying to replicate the more informal side of human communication at work is really important. And what I've noticed, I guess, in the work that I've been doing is that also, I guess it's understanding that in terms of difference in people's personalities will also dictate the degree to which they may struggle with this kind of stuff. Yeah. So, those people that are more extroverted, who really rely on the energy of others, particularly in teams, may be struggling much more working from home and being isolated than those traditionally more introverted individuals who kind of need time away from group settings. Although making an assumption that introverts don't need to be around lots of people is a mistake, because it's much more nuanced than that. But I think you can pick up on cues from people in terms of how they're, in terms of how they're coping with the current situation, and therefore I think it's thinking about ways in which you can connect, and it's not one size fits all. I don't think it's finding ways that you, and it is this idea of connection. It's really important to work hard on that, and the three areas that you covered around intellectual, the kind of emotional connectedness and social engagement is really key, and it's complex and it's hard to do virtually, but it's not impossible to do. And I think that's where we do need our creative minds to kind of work at this problem, and it's going to be a mixture of things, isn't it? But it's not giving up on the social side, because I think it is really, really important to connect with people on a human level.
Yeah.
And does this need leadership from the top, or the top demonstrating that this is an acceptable and an important part of?
Yeah, I think it does. I'm just thinking about my daughter's firm, actually, because what they do is they have these they always used to have like a social event on a Thursday night where people wouldn't meet. They would physically go out to something, and it was always supported by top management. The leaders would pay for some sort of social event. They'd go out and they'd go, I don't know, bowling or whatever they would do. And now Thursday nights is online quiz night, online this, that, and the other night. So, but basically it's within work's time as well. That's the important thing, is that a portion of the day or late afternoon of working hours is actually committed to a social event, and people are expected to go to it, and are not forced to go to it, but they're kind of encouraged to go to it. And the leadership pay for that. It's part of sort of the working culture. And it definitely does generate a very positive attitude. I mean, people enjoy doing it. It's fun. It's their opportunity to see their colleagues in a social way, rather than just as a Zoom work call or a Teams work call, whatever it might be. But I think the other point you talk about, the commitment of leadership, Fiona, I think it's also about, it's a major part of engagement, is this notion of what's called the job demands resources model, if you want to get into the academic side of it. But what it boils down to is that you have to have the resources to meet the demands of the job in its simplest form. And I think the demands of the job have got higher, and people are expected to be perhaps even more productive now, because companies are not necessarily able to afford to keep all of their workers, because they're not selling as much in the way of goods or services. And therefore, as you start reducing your headcount, you're putting more burdens on the people who are perhaps left behind. There's kind of gaps in the team, and you get these feelings of, survivor syndrome, where their friends have been made redundant, colleagues have been made redundant, they're still holding a job, they're not really sure why they've got a job and other people have gone. So you get that kind of survivor syndrome. But at the same time, you've got the demands and the urgency of work and getting work done. And that means you've got to have the support to do it. And not everybody's IT is that great, to be honest. Not everybody's got good connectivity. They might not live in an area which is well supported by, the various network providers that actually provide the internet and the line speeds and so on and so forth. And I think, we've all come to rely on technology so much. And when it doesn't work, we're literally in despair, aren't we? We're sort of tearing our hair out because we can't do our job. What are we going to do? It's all gone down. And there's this sense of stress and panic and trying to get work done when you haven't actually got resources to do the job. And in terms of what employers are doing, we do see that the employers are actually trying to provide resources like a desk, so that you're not kind of breaking your back, and a chair that will actually support you to work, and so on. But you've got to bear in mind, not everybody's got a home that's got room for a desk or a chair, or you've got people literally sitting at their ironing boards and their kitchen tables actually trying to work from home. And even though employers might want to support or try to support them with proper equipment, they might not necessarily have the space for it. They've got a house with children running around, and they've got the homeschooling and all these issues as well. So it's not an easy thing to do, but obviously having the resources to do your job properly is crucial if you're going to actually encourage and foster employee engagement.
And I noticed you highlight quite a few times in your article that engagement is a two-way process. So maybe both of you can just, from the other side of the picture, I mean, if you're the employee, is there something about taking the initiative of reaching out to the management team or your team leader or the leadership?
Do you want me to take that one first, or Paul to go first on that one? I don't mind. I don't want to hold the conversation.
You go ahead.
Well, I just think that for some employees that might be an easy thing to do, Fiona, that you can actually just, ring up your boss and ask for something, or, initiate a conversation. But we do have to accept to think that not everybody is going to feel as confident as to be able to do that. So it's going back to something Paul mentioned about, people's personalities. But I think there has to be a supportive environment that the leadership is encouraging the two-way dialogue. So engagement should not really be about the management from the top down position telling employees, well, this is all very well and you can do this, this and this, and we're supporting this, this and this, because it just becomes a directive top down. There's got to be a sense or a feeling that this is a two-way process, that employees will say something, that their voice will actually be heard, it will be listened to, and that there will be a response as a result of it. So I guess what I'm saying is, you can do your employee engagement surveys, you can have this sort of get them to fill in the questionnaires just as they always would have done had they been in the workplace. But if you don't actually listen to what's being said, or if you don't listen to dialogue that's actually happening online, for example, in a video call, and you ask for their comments and then you do nothing with them, then in essence, you haven't really got two-way communication, have you? You've still just got a one-way from the top decision-making process. So employee voice is really critical, but as I say, you can hear the voice, but you've got to respond to it.
Yeah, I think this is where leadership and culture plays a really important role, doesn't it? And I think this is where sometimes kind of traditional views of leadership can get in the way. So that kind of almost militaristic idea of what a leader should be, very strong, turn up to meetings, speak first. It's having a more emotionally intelligent understanding of how you show up and how you manage space, I suppose, that not all leaders really understand. So if you're the most powerful person in the room and you speak first and share your opinion, the chances are you will shut down people with opposing views from the moment you open your mouth. So, modern approaches to leadership are all about actually encouraging leaders to take a step back and to almost take a more coaching approach where you ask the question first and you're curious about what the response might be, rather than, controlling the space and showing up in a powerful response, I suppose, because you can influence teams and individuals really effectively, and you can create much more of a supportive environment and a collaborative environment, if you hold back on some of those tendencies, I suppose, because the more we can get people to speak up and share their views and share how they're feeling, that's great news for leaders as well, because they then don't go into situations with their eyes closed. They can understand, what's going on. So I've heard great cases of, CEOs continuing to do like breakfast meetings and things like that online. I think that's a great way to kind of connect with people and not dealing with it in a hierarchical way. It's just, almost randomly selecting groups, bringing them together and having a discussion. And that's beneficial for both parties then. That's where employees will feel much more part of the organization, that they're cared for, that they're listened to. And it's great for those leaders as well, those senior people, because they get to speak firsthand to people. They're not relying on sometimes third, fourth hand versions of stories that go round, because I'm convinced so much of this is around storytelling as well, which is that's an ancient form of communication, isn't it? But organizations have their stories, and sometimes those stories are good and sometimes those stories are bad. The more control we have of a narrative, the more likely we are to succeed. And narratives are challenging. The hero's journey has ups and downs, and this is a really challenging part we're living through at the moment, aren't we? So it's bringing all sorts of incredible opportunities for people, really, and it's a great opportunity for leaders to really stand up and experiment and become better versions of themselves and lead better organizations as a consequence.
I think that's really important, because if you don't hear the stories, if you don't hear what's happening on the ground, you actually don't know what's going on. You've lost touch. And it's the stories that build the culture of an organization, isn't it? And the heroes, as you mentioned, these are sort of the cultural components. So if organizations actually don't know what it's like for individuals at whatever levels those individuals are working at, how can they possibly know whether what they're doing is effective or not, and whether it's going to lead to, good organizational performance or not? So I agree. I think that's a really important point. I think I've just got one other thing probably to add, which is about consideration of, when you're considering engagement, considering job roles as well, because people fulfill a job role. They've got their job description, and they, on the whole, job roles have become much more flexible over time. We're all expected to be able to, do all manner of different things. But I think there's an issue now about whether those job roles still work in the context of home working. So when you're working at home, can you actually fulfill the job role in the same way that you would have done had you been physically on the premises? So going back to the conversations and the leaders listening, the only way they're going to know that people's job roles are not being fulfilled in the way they should be, before things go radically wrong and the productivity and performance is not there, is by listening to the stories of the issues that people actually have in fulfilling those roles. So I think there's an issue there for engagement, being in the right role, having the right training, knowing what job you're meant to be doing, not being in some sort of role conflict where you've got no idea what you're doing or who you're reporting to. I think those issues have actually really come to the fore when you're working from home, because your entire environment has changed. And therefore, if the leaders don't listen and they just make assumptions and impose their own views, you're really shutting down every avenue you have of improving employee engagement. So I agree entirely with you, Paul. It's about being open and having that emotional intelligence and being able to let people speak. But I guess what I would say is don't let them speak and then just, shut them down again, because once you do that, they won't speak again. Once they've actually lost that confidence that you're going to listen, even no matter how open you're trying to be, once they know they've been shut down, they're probably not going to respond in the same way. So you've got your chance to listen, and you've got to make sure you take it, I think.
And on the subject of listening, Paul, you were very enthusiastic about music as being a way to engage people. I just ran through my mind there. I was thinking about, in the days when you would have these get-togethers, there would be often go and put your yellow sticky against this with your suggestion and this and that, and then we'll feed it back. Well, of course, people can't do that in real life. But something like music, for example, you had a fabulous example of people selecting a piece of music that meant something to them and sharing it. Would you like to explain a bit about those sort of creative techniques that can make a bit of a difference?
Well, certainly, because I think sometimes we get locked into kind of traditional ways of problem solving, I suppose. I guess what I'm experiencing at the moment and seeing in others is that the response is toughen up and kind of work harder at things, which in essence, it creates more tension. If you just think about it in terms of your body, when you're actually just, working harder and putting in more effort, your ability to be creative and actually come up with better solutions is probably narrowed as well. So my experience of kind of working with groups and leaders and organizations is to kind of, well, how do you excite a bit more creativity? And sometimes it's by introducing quite abstract things. So using artwork, for example, and certainly within coaching, there are things like using coaching cards with images, and just sharing a selection of images and asking somebody to select one. What are you drawn to when you think about this particular issue, can be really liberating, and it can encourage people to, associate and come up with lots of connections and interesting ways of thinking that potentially they wouldn't have arrived at before. And certainly music does a very similar job in that I've always been fascinated by watching films where, there's a musical soundtrack that accompanies what happens on screen, and the music is in fact telling you often some subtext, whether the orchestra's playing some low rumbling tunes, then we know, oh, there's something quite not right, something dodgy going on here, something to be worried about. But of course, in real life, we feel those same sensations, don't we? There is a score playing, if you like. It's an emotional one, and what music does is kind of on a very almost visceral level, it's giving you information and it's creating emotions in ourselves. So there's an interesting interplay. So I've done some really interesting work with individuals and leaders where they kind of select a piece of music that they think represents themselves at their best, for example. And it's incredible the kind of depth it brings out in people. And going back to engagement, I think so much of engagement actually relates to purpose. This idea of what really matters to you. So it's often around meaning, isn't it? And I think certainly when I felt most engaged in the work that I'm doing, it's because it means something to me. There's a purpose to it. And it ticks so many more boxes emotionally that I will lose track of time. So as Sue was saying, I think that's a clear indication of engagement, isn't it? When you kind of look at the clock and think, oh, blimey, where's that last hour gone?
Yeah, it's called being in flow. It's sort of being in flow, and you're so absorbed in what you're doing that you don't recognize the time at all. 1 minute it's 9 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden it's past lunchtime, and you're just so engrossed. So people who are engaged are, typically in quotes in flow. That's what you'd expect to see. Yeah. And then you've got to be careful about over engagement and burnout, haven't you?
Absolutely. But I think Sir Ken Robinson wrote some wonderful stuff around this, and his books around, in his terms, it was about finding your element. And that idea of being in flow and for time just whizzing by. I mean, it's a wonderful place to be in, I guess, and that's when all your creativity is coming through as well. So I think in terms of bringing this full circle, I think organizations need to remove some of the barriers that might stop people finding their flow, finding their element, I suppose. And sometimes unwittingly, organizations can do that. But equally, it's finding making sure that people aren't overcommitting and exhausting themselves as well. So having those mechanisms in place where people can reflect and pause and take time and relax and do things that recharge their batteries is also incredibly important. And it goes for simple things, I think. It's interesting, when we first went into lockdown, everybody said things like, oh, well, it's brilliant, I don't have to commute anymore. And those people who were commuting, where it was like an hour's journey or something like that, people were saying, brilliant, I've got that time back. But it's interesting, what do you do with that time? Over time, I think people have now, their commuting time now has converted into work time. So one thing some companies are playing around with are saying, well, you would normally have commute time, so take it. So I'm taking an hour commute time, and I'm going to use that time to do some of the things I might have done that helped me recharge. Or, when you've finished a day and you've had a tough day, and sometimes a journey in the car or a journey on the train or a walk we've kind of processed all that stuff by the time we get home. So when we're in our own homes, you might need to take a similar length of time to kind of let go of some of that tension, to be able to then refocus on your intention for the rest of the day. So, or the evening. So actually, I need to let go of my work day in order to show up well as a father, as a husband, as a son, whatever role that you want to be. I think those kinds of things are really important as well.
It's that separation, isn't it? Again, you're separating the work life and the home life, and you're trying to reduce down that spillover, the sort of, work into family and family into work spillover time, which is not really, very beneficial. So the idea that you can wind down and have that break, is a good thing to do.
Yeah, and signaling it. So do you pack up? or does everything just remain where it is? Do you stop answering emails? And it's all of those things that you kind of have to contract with yourself around, I think, if you want to maintain perspective and flexibility in order to be the best version of yourselves in all requirements. And that's not just within work, it's how you show up outside of work as well, which is really important.
Yeah.
Goodness, well, we've covered an awful lot of ground there. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for discussing engagement today. Thank you. Goodbye.
Pleasure. Thank you.